Okay, so now it's time to introduce the ceiling speed struts, ceiling bracers. We have a few different names for them, but this is the L-track and bracing system that goes up into the ceiling of the van here. So we've got all the components kind of laid out on the table here, so I just wanted to go over them. There's two parallel lengths that run the full length of the van, all right, and the bracing system is broken into four parts total, and that's these parts right here. So on either side there's going to be one long bracer and then one short one. The short one is in back, all right, and then there's corresponding L-tracks that bolt into these assemblies, all right, and those L-tracks are going to be labeled TC1 and TC2, and so you'll have two tracks labeled TC1 and two tracks labeled TC2. TC1 goes towards the front of the assembly, TC2 goes towards the back of the assembly, all right? So that's your both parallel tracks on the ceiling. And then there's a couple other components. These are little center support brackets, and these are just extra support for the ceiling panels when that install happens. And then there's a couple ceiling kind of cross braces. These run in between the two parallel lengths of track, and there's also L-track that gets bolted to these assemblies too, and they capture the panels as well. And then there's just more L-track to tie into. So that's kind of the whole ceiling bracing system. They're going to be attached with either through bolts or 1/4-inch rivets, and then the L-track bolts here go through the L-track and into the bracing system. One other thing to note, for those of you that have kind of paid attention to our Sprinter bracing system, one difference between the Sprinter and the Transit is there's a separate bracer kind of midway into the Transit bracing system. That's kind of a floating bracer and reinforces this one. And so when it's kind of a 3-layer system. When you set the track on this side, it goes through this orange bracer and then into the PEM nut here. And it's pretty easy to see once you have it laid out in front of you. So what we're going to do is basically assemble the bracers with the L-track onto them, so we have one full assembly to go up into the van. One thing to note is your A-frame, or I'm sorry, your first box will come with a little tube of this thread locker. Definitely use this. This is actually really important because we can get cold welding or galling issues with the stainless steel hardware in the stainless steel PEM nuts here. So when you're assembling this speed strut assembly, just get a little bit of this thread locker onto the threads of each one of these bolts going through, and that'll just basically, it provides a layer of lubrication on the way in, and then when it sets up, it actually keeps them from rattling out and unthreading while you're driving down the road with your van. So we're just going to assemble the system here on the bench before we bring it into the van and install it. So the tools we need for this, just one of the 4mm Allen keys, Allen wrenches to assemble the L-track onto the speed strut system. So we'll kind of flip everything over and lay the track down and bolt it in. So what's going on here is we flip the assemblies upside down again. TH1 is going to line up here. You just kind of line up the bolt holes. That extra bracer that I talked about is underneath here, and so I basically set it down and then I just sort of shift it around until I see the PEM nuts through the holes and I know it's aligned. But you can see the name of the game here is sort of spreading the load across the whole system. So the TH1 L-track only comes up to here on this bracer. This is where the two bracers split, and then the TH2 L-track is going to come the rest, whoops, that's the wrong one, is going to come the rest of the way and kind of brace that that transition there. And then you just line up the holes through the L-track into the PEM nuts on the system, and then again take one of your 30mm countersunk M6 bolts and your Allen key, thread a little bit of that thread locker on there, and just go through and tighten them all down until it's all good and tight. Okay, so quick little addendum and correction to what I said before. I was saying TH1, TC1. For the ceiling tracks, what you want to look for in the stamp is TH148, meaning the Transit High Roof 148, and then C2. So you're kind of looking at the last little bit of that stamp, and that's a designation that tells you it's a ceiling. So C1 or C2. C1 is going to be the forward part. C2 is going to be the aft part. One other thing to keep in mind is we don't use power tools with these pieces of hardware, and the reason is because power tools spin them really fast, they heat up, and then you can run into that galling issue that we fought with before. So between the thread locker, lubricating it on the way in, and just taking it with hand tools so it doesn't go so fast, you should be all set. So the next thing that we want to do is set up the track a little bit more to go into the van, and we're gonna protect the track from this particular mounting tool that we have. This comes in the kit. There's 2 of them, and the purpose of these is they use OEM holes in the ceiling ribs to clamp into and hold the whole assembly up in the ceiling while you kind of, you know, finagle it a little bit to get the right fitment. But it's metal against, you know, it's steel against aluminum, so you could scratch up your L-track, and especially if you get the black anodized option, you don't want to do that. So we just take some painter's tape. You can use like felt tape or anything. You know, duct tape is kind of annoying because it leaves a bunch of residue behind. But anywhere where there's a transition where these brackets are, that's where a ceiling rib is going to come through. That's where the tool is going to lay. So really, it's pretty simple. You're just laying it on the track. The only thing you don't want to do is wrap it all the way around the track and around the orange piece, because then it'll get sandwiched in behind the orange piece in the ceiling rib, and then you'll never get it out. So you just want to make sure that you can easily take the tape back off after you've mounted the assembly. If you're using painter's tape like this, you might want to do 2 or 3 layers, because if you're shifting the whole assembly back and forth a little bit, the tool can kind of cut through the tape pretty easily and mar up the track. So do a few layers to protect it, or you know, after you put painter's tape down, you can come back through with a heavier duty tape or something like that. The painter's tape just comes off the track so nicely. That's kind of why we like it. All right, so next thing we need to do to get our speed strut assemblies placed properly is we actually want to measure to find the true dead center of these ceiling cross ribs here. The reason we want to measure is because from the factory, these ceiling ribs can shift back and forth from side to side by as much as 1/4 of an inch, so that can throw off the placement of our ceiling bracers. So the good measuring points to go from are, there's a bracket that comes up off the sidewall and goes halfway into the ceiling space, and it captures this center rib, and that's on both sides of the van. So these are static, and you can see before they weld them, it kind of captured in there, and there's a nice hard edge that you can measure from. It's a good measuring point on both sides. So I'm tucking my tape measure right tight up against that edge, and I'm going on the side here. And the reason I'm going on the side is because the measuring tape, to get an accurate measurement, should be straight across. And when it's straight across, it lays up against the side of the ceiling rib here and gives us a good place to mark. And so I'll take this. Our particular measurement happens to be, what is it, 44 and 10/16? Okay, cool. 44 and 10/16. We're gonna split that in half, so it's 22 and 5/16 for this particular rib. Don't rely on those numbers I just gave you. Your number is gonna be what it is for you. So you're just taking the full measurement from this edge to that edge, cutting it in half, and you're marking your tape measure or the ceiling rib accordingly. So if you can notice, on the ceiling rib itself, the split between these 2 holes looks like what's dead center, but it's off by a good 1/4 inch or so. And it's a good idea to take that measurement and transfer the line down. You know, you can use a carpenter's square or something like that up along the edge and kind of transfer the line down here, so you have a couple spots where you can see it, even all the way across to the front edge too, if you can do that. But that's our dead center measurement. Now keep in mind, each ceiling rib is going to have a slightly different measurement, so you're going to need to measure each one of the ceiling ribs, cut it in half, and make your center mark on every single one of them. One more time so you guys can see this up close. This is our measuring point. It's right when this bracket comes in, and it's this hard kind of ledge right here. Tucking our tape measure up here, following it across, and there's the same measuring point right. Okay, so the next measurement we need to take is going back outward on either direction, and this measurement is a number that you do want to pay attention to. That number is 17 and 3/16, so 17 inches and 3/16. So what that's doing is it's giving us a mark to reference with our speed struts when we come back in with those. And I'll show you guys exactly where that mark comes into play when we get the speed strut assembly in here. I did use this punch again because I wanted a nice, you know, clean, fine line to lay the edge of the speed strut assembly against. Okay. I went to the edge there. Just to recap, we measured from the center line that we marked. We measured 17 and 3/16 inches out this way, and 17 and 3/16 inches out that way. We're going to do that on all of the ceiling ribs. Okay, so now that we've measured the center mark on all of our ceiling ribs, we can move on to the next step. Because of the inconsistencies in the placement of these ceiling ribs on these transits, we kind of developed a different technique here. And so we're actually starting with these center brackets that house the piece of L-track that runs across the ceiling from, you know, each length of the parallel L-tracks on the ceiling bracers. So we're going to start here. There's 2 of these pieces, so it's going to give us a nice parallel measurement to work with. We measured the actual center of this piece as well. So that's our true center line on this piece. And what we're doing is basically putting it up against our true center line on the ceiling rib. All right, and so this is a good 2-person job too. You can work around it by clamping it up there and doing certain things, but this is where having an extra set of hands can definitely come in handy. So we'll dive into that right now. All right, so the ceiling ribs that we're working with for these cross braces are ceiling rib number 1 and ceiling rib number 3. So number 1 is kind of the one basically midway in on your slider door. So that's going to be the first one. What we need to do first though is, you can see we've got some PEM nuts, cinch nuts. So just like elsewhere in the kit, where these are, you know, we need to cut little relief holes for the bolts and then for these pieces of hardware themselves behind the scenes. So we're gonna put this up there. Get yourself a little punch or some sort of scribe that fits through the center of it, so we can mark where we're gonna be drilling with our step bit. And again, I've got my center line here on the ceiling rib, and I'm just visually aligning it with my center mark on the orange bracer. And that looks good. So Steve's gonna come in here and mark where those punches should go. Oop, that shifted. Okay. Okay, so one way to mark, you know, there's cutting the relief holes for these PEM nuts. They actually almost line up with some factory holes in the ceiling ribs. So we're kind of holding this up as a reference line with our center line here, and just marking where PEM nuts are getting close to the edges of these factory holes. And we're basically just marking with a marker which direction we might need to open the holes up, or you might just decide to open up a bigger hole in general and make it really big. Kind of whatever works for you. But either way, we need to kind of cut into the edges of these holes to allow room for these cinch nuts to recess into there. Okay, one quick tip before you start drilling into the ceiling ribs. You're working over your head, so absolutely use eye protection. You should have been before anyway, but and then also gloves. And if you're not a tough guy like Steve, I recommend some long sleeves too, because everything's going to be falling down on your arms and it can be kind of hot and painful.
Yeah, these step bits do work somewhat directionally, so you can go in at an angle, apply more force in the direction that you want to open them up. So we don't need to open up this big hole to bigger, we just need to create a half moon shape into the side on some of them. And slower is always better, and then the sparks come down on you a little less furiously. Reminder that about 1.5 inches above these holes is the roof of your van, so make sure you don't actually penetrate into the ceiling or through the ceiling into the roof.
Okay, so we recommended a step bit for this part, and we'd also recommend if you have a die grinder or a Dremel tool with a small grinding bit, especially for the larger holes that we're kind of turning into more oblong holes. It's just a little bit easier tool to work with. The step bit can sometimes walk around on you a little bit. So we're going to go back through and paint with our rust preventative and then install. Okay. All right, so now we're going to drill our 3/16 inch rivets. Here's another thing that we're noticing is the ceiling ribs on these Fords. Basically, they're not perfectly level from front to back. So the front edge of it is pitched up slightly compared to the back edge. So what we're going to do is actually rivet the back side first, and then go to the front, and we'll wedge something in here to level it out nicely, and then rivet the front. And the reason we're doing that is because then when the track is on here and it's interfacing with the track going this way, everything will be nice and level and it won't look pitched. So we'll go from basically these two working out, and you'll want to push up in the middle, get everything to lay flat and kind of match the crown of the roof. A couple little reminders here. Don't forget to put the rust preventative on the rivets before you put them in here. Another thing is some of these rivet holes may kind of halfway interfere with factory holes in the ceiling ribs. If you do see one kind of overlapping, don't worry about it. You know, you can get enough of these rivets in here to hold this piece up in here plenty strong and keep the shape and all that stuff. So for instance, this one is kind of halfway overlapping a factory hole. We're not going to worry about the rivet there. We can still get them here, here, and here, and that's going to be plenty. Okay, so with this, what we're doing is we've got a piece of L-track mocked up here to sort of mimic what this piece of L-track will do, and we're trying to basically match the pitch of the L-track so both pieces, horizontal and vertical, come together at the same plane and they're not going like this or like that. We want them both to be nice and flat and level with each other. And we're pretty close, but I've got a couple of little plastic wedge tools, which if you bought these to tear down the van and all the factory components, then you'll already have them with you, and we're already pretty close. This is about exactly where we need it right now. I basically just stuck the wedge in this end. You know, if you're looking from this side, I was putting it in between the orange bracer and the bottom of the ceiling rib, and until I get to the spot where it just looks nice and flat, and then we'll keep this in there while we drill out some of these rivets. Okay, so we're finished with the front cross bracer. Now we've moved on to ceiling rib number 3 to put our next one in. So again, it's the same process. We're using our specific, you know, marked center line, and we're going to match it up against our marked center line of the ceiling rib. We're going to have to drill out some of these holes, widen them a little bit for relief holes for these PEM nuts here on the bracer, and then we're going to follow the same process. One thing I want to point out, and we'll kind of show some closer video, this particular rib isn't pitched forward like that front one, so this one will lay nice and flat, and we'll show you some indicators as to how we know that this one is in the right spot. And so putting this bracer up on this side here, when we get it up into its spot and locate it, you know, we're just making sure it's good and snug up against this rib kind of on both sides now, both this side and the front side. And then centered after we make a few adjustments to the relief holes for the PEM nuts. Right now I'm just actually transferring my center line to the front of this rib so I can see it when I put the bracer up there and have a reference point. Alright, so now we're going to put this piece up in place. The relief holes are cut, so we're just going to hold it nice and steady, flush up against the bottom edge of this rib, and I'm using our center line to sight it properly, and then we're going to start drilling and setting rib nuts.
Alright, cool.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead with starting to install the speed struts or the ceiling bracers. We're going to start with the driver's side here. We've got our speed strut tool here, the mounting tool, and just a couple reminders on this. This short arm of the tool is going to face outward. Okay, so it's going to face the outside of the van. The long arm of the tool, where my thumb is going to face inward. And then the little trough here, cut out, that's what's going to kind of house the track. So it's going to fit on the track itself and kind of fit around that. We're using ribs number 2 and 4 for these tools. All right, because we're going to use these 2 holes here. These are our mounting holes that the tool fits up into and kind of hooks on to hold the piece up in place. And here we go. And then the other thing to keep in mind here, the other thing to do is as you put it up into place, you kind of have to bring it forward slightly so the back end gets over the factory wiring harness. Put it up into place, and then you're kind of jamming it all the way back and favoring it backwards so that this front flange here is flat up against the side of this rib number 1. All right, so we're hands off now. The tools are doing their job holding the piece up in place. And our reference points are here where we've installed the ceiling cross piece. When we go to start drilling, we're going to start with rib number 1 and then go on to rib number 3 to secure the brackets and kind of hold it up into place. So it's good. You can kind of do it with one hand. Again, it's good to have a second pair of hands to hold it up. And before we do that, we want to just push it flush, the edge of this track flush up against the end of this track and just get a nice transition there. Okay, so before we drill our holes for these rivets here, we want to actually tighten up these brackets here. This one is pretty much static, but we want to tighten these brackets up so everything is basically tight in its spot before we drill our holes. So drill these ones, and then what Steve is doing is this one's adjustable, as are the rest of them throughout the kit. And you want to kind of favor it forward so it's nice and flush up against the skin of the rib, just like this one. So we're going to tighten all this down.
But they are tapered, so you want to make sure they're up all the way before you tighten.
For our 1/4-inch rivets here, remember to use eye protection. And what we like to do is actually kind of work in an X. So Steve started with this one. So now we're going to go back on the other side across from it and go here. And then we'll go here and then there. All right, so sometimes you have to do a little bit of sort of problem solving here. This one we were noticing The bracer wanted to make this push down slightly, and so we actually went back and loosened up these bolts ever so slightly to allow us to kind of manipulate it a little bit more, and then put some pressure up on it before we sank the rivets and then tightened them back down. So sometimes you might break procedure or the sequence slightly in order to get the desired result. And the desired result for us was a nice clean transition from this track to this track that sort of matched the other side. Okay. Okay, the last step in the ceiling bracer, and actually all of the A-frame, are these little center support brackets. These are just providing a little bit of extra securement for the center ceiling panels. Pretty simple. We're going on ribs number 2 and 4, and the little mountain here is only on one side of this piece, and the mountain is going to be on the driver's side. So that means it's on the back of the rib. All right. You've already marked the center of your ceiling rib. Use this little hole as kind of a sight window and align it with the center hole, or sorry, the center mark that you made. All right. And then you're going to come through, drill some 3/16 inch holes right there, and set that piece. All right. And then the same exact procedure for rib number 4. So once again, the mountain goes on favored to the driver's side of the van, and then kind of this flange is facing backwards, and that's all you need to know. Okay.